Welcome back, everybody. Season 2, Episode 6
Woo!
of...
We're
That's
back!
Right. That's right, we're back from Guns to Keyboards.
It's been too long, man.
It's been way too long.
I've missed these recording sessions. I gotta be honest, but I guess why? I'll let you explain. Why have we not done this in so long?
Yeah, I had a mix of reserve duty / work trip that completely ruined our ongoing recordings.
Our momentum.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking
cadence
for.
of recording.
Cadence. Can always count on you to think of the right words.
I'm a human dictionary, baby. Just whatever you need.
But we're back, Season 2, Episode 6, and ready to continue the good stuff, the good conversations that we've been having.
Let's get back to it. Before we get going, I know we talked before this. I know you don't want to go into too much detail about your reserve duty, but just from what you saw, are we fucked?
Yeah, I actually think your question kind of relates to what we wanted to talk about today, which, is the IDF just winging it in this war?
And this is not planned, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm legitimately asking, are we fucked?
He's legitimately asking me, and I'm legitimately answering that, A, we're fucked, and B, I'm worried that we are kind of just winging it here by this point.
Okay.
Let me break down my answer for you more concretely.
Sure.
I think that if we look at this war and all 7 fronts of the war, you have the Houthis, you have Iraq, you have Iran, you have Syria, Lebanon, the West Bank, and Gaza. I think overall, on all the fronts outside of Gaza and maybe the Houthis, Israel's doing relatively good. I'm not saying it's doing great. I think it's doing relatively good. It managed to humiliate Hezbollah and get the Lebanese state back involved in South Lebanon. Syria has undergone full-on regime change, partially to do with Israeli policy, but not entirely. Iran has never been weaker. The militants acting out of Iraq are also kept at bay for now. And you have the West Bank, where Palestinian terrorist groups operating out of the West Bank have not reached the dream level of operation that Sinwar, before his death, would have wanted it to reach. So you could see that on the other fronts, Israel's not doing all that bad. On the Gaza front, I'm really worried. I'm really worried that by this point, we're kind of just winging it. We are not really coming forward with any strategic plan here, and you and I have spoken about this before. We're kind of just throwing a bunch of ammo at what we think is reasonable targets in Gaza. And I'm not saying that, by the way, to by any means say that we're targeting the wrong stuff. I'm just kind of lacking the big picture here, the big plan. Mm-hmm. Just like with Lebanon, we actually had a big plan of we're going to dismantle and humiliate Hezbollah and we're going to get the Lebanese state back involved. That was a big plan that was executed.
Push them north of Litani.
Right.
Here's the line, get them on the other side of it. It wasn't necessarily even dismantle them. I think that just kind of happened by happy chance that they were unable to regroup after the beeper attack or the pager attack. But the plan was very simple. It was get them north of the Litani and destroy any military equipment you find along the way.
Yeah, and that was a reasonable goal that had a straightforward solution to it, and Israel arguably achieved its goals.
It's something a conventional army can do.
Right. And when I look at Gaza, when I was called back for reserve duty, I've been in reserve duty now, or I had been for like 5 weeks. I have another 2 weeks of reserve duty in May. There was no part of me that doubted the morality of what I'm doing. I really do think that this is a just war and that we do need to give some sort of political and or military response to the threat that is coming from the Gaza Strip. There's no part of me that doubts the morality of this conflict from the Israeli perspective. But I kind of just think by this point, we don't really have a plan. We're just winging it and hitting a bunch of targets in Gaza, which, as I said, may definitely be legitimate targets, and I really do think that by and large they are.
Or at least that the intent is that there are legitimate targets.
Right. But I don't really understand where all this is going. We're setting up I heard the prime minister a few weeks ago discussing that we're now going back to fighting in Gaza and we're setting up the Morag corridor in the Gaza Strip. This is the great master plan that the prime minister of Israel has set up for Gaza. What is the Morag corridor? It's just a road that cuts off Rafah from Khan Yunis. Yeah, this might be a great tactical way to pressure Hamas and to limit its military operations in the Gaza Strip. But what's the vision here?
Did you see the Morag Road, by the way?
I did not see the Morag Road.
Okay.
No. But from what I understand, it's supposed to be this Netzarim-styled road, just like the Netzarim cuts off North Gaza from the rest of it. This is supposed to cut off Rafah from
How
Khan Yunis.
effective was the Netzarim corridor? Do you know?
For the best of my understanding, was effective. Definitely applied significant pressure on Hamas. But again, this is a tactical victory. This is, let's put a siege on northern Gaza and apply a lot of pressure on Hamas. Now this is the same thing in Rafah. And all this is to say, by the way, the best tactical move may in fact be to conquer the Morag corridor. I'm not saying that this is not what Israel should be doing. I'm just lacking the end game here. Where is all this going? Which is leading me to conclude the answer to the question, is the IDF just winging it? I kind of think so. And I don't really blame the IDF.
Well, the question, if I may remind you, was, are we fucked?
Right. and the polite answer to are we fucked, or the polite revision of it is the IDF just winging it. And let me know your opinion here. I don't really blame the IDF for that. Yeah, the IDF at the end of the day gets its strategic vision from the political leadership. And I think that the political leadership is not giving its strategic long-term plan to the IDF. And this is just kind of playing out in these very tactical, focused gains in the Gaza Strip. Conquer the Morag corridor, isolate Rafiah, go back into conquering part of the Netzarim corridor, apply military pressure on Gaza, cut off all humanitarian aid for going into the Gaza Strip, cut off other utilities that are providing aid to the Gaza Strip. These are all a bunch of tactical moves that are kind of tying together. And I'm just lacking the end goal here.
Do you, look, I can expound on my opinion on it, but I feel like it hasn't changed in nearly 18 months, which is, there is no end game, and like many Israelis, I'm furious at the government for not providing a political solution to this problem. Do you believe the Saudi report that came out recently that Hamas has successfully drafted 30,000 men into their army?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't necessarily think that they have the level of training that a Nukhba soldier has or had before October 7th. But bringing on 30,000 people, that's not that difficult to do. Yeah, you can pay a garbage salary or pay no salary at all. You give some sense of purpose and income to people that might not have any other choice. That doesn't sound completely unusual to me in terms of the figure that was given. But behind that 30,000 might be a bunch of 15-year-old kids that have never held a gun in their entire lives that are going to basically get very specific tasks like plant a roadside bomb here or wait here and shoot a shoulder-strapped RPG from there. I don't know. What do you think?
For the 30,000? Yeah, look, I agree with you. I mean, it kind of goes back to the whole concept of like when CENTCOM Command talked about insurgent math, Insurgent math, typically you take, 100 terrorists, you kill 2, how many are you left with? Normal math is 98. Insurgent math is, well, now you got 120 because those 2 guys each got cousins and brothers who are now furious at you and want to take revenge for them. So every time you kill one of them, their families are just going to take the revenge and you're going to have 5 recruits or 10 recruits each in their place. So yeah, I mean, it's exactly as you said, like people who either from just they have no other choice from just a purely economical perspective, in the sense that maybe they find it difficult to procure food or water, and Hamas comes to them and says, hey, we'll provide you both. Just come and do exactly as you said, simple tasks here and there. Or people who legitimately want revenge, of which I am sure everybody in Gaza, to some extent or another, feels that way, wanting some kind of revenge on Israel. But so yeah, I don't know. 30,000 does seem like a large number, though. It does seem that's kind of more. I'm sure Hamas has no problem recruiting, but to recruit 30,000 people at the same time, you do need a large level of bureaucratic organization in order to take these 30,000 people and actually put them into units with a chain of command and with a structure and with missions that are going to not cause them to overlap and accidentally kill each other, kind of thing. Or not have 5,000 guys working and 25,000 guys just sitting around doing nothing. So 30,000 seems a bit like an extreme number to me. I think that was more of just like a stick in the eye for the Israelis.
Yeah.
To just kind of again add to that sense of like uselessness and hopelessness in the fight. That hey, you can kill as many of us as you want, but unless you kill everybody in Gaza, you'll never get rid of Hamas, kind of thing.
So I want to take this topic that we're talking about of is the IDF just winging it, or are we fucked, as you asked more directly, against the backdrop of the report coming out of Saudi Arabia and the lack of clear endgame that you and I have spoken about ad nauseum also in previous episodes. And I want to zoom out to kind of maybe look at the IDF as an army here, the IDF's operation as an army that, in my opinion, I think for Israel, the ability to kind of just wing it and just throw a bunch of paint at the wall and hope for the best, to a certain degree, that's our comfort zone.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Israel has always had never really a counterinsurgent strategy, but it's always been a strategy of containment. This idea of like, look, counterinsurgency suggests that there's a political problem, and if you can provide that political solution with the military, then you can end the war. So for Israel, though, the problem, at least from the Israeli perspective, is that Israel exists. And how do you solve that problem? Well, take all the Jews and you either kick a bunch of them out, or the Jewish people have to say, hey, we're not a state anymore. That's not a political solution that anyone or that 99% of Israelis are willing to accommodate. So as a result, you have this idea of just containment, just pure containment. And this has been absolutely the Israeli military strategy of just, if you look back, starting from the end of the Independence War up to today, this war can very much be defined as nihilistic terrorist attacks followed by revenge strikes. That's very much been in Israel we don't call it revenge, we call it deterrence. This idea of we need to show our deterrence, to frighten the enemy into backing down, which I have my own theory about why I think that's just a silly concept, but at the same time, it does kind of satisfy this just kind of primal need of needing to feel safe and on top and capable and violent when need be. And yeah, I mean, for listeners who are interested, Google 1956 Moshe Dayan funeral speech. The gist of the speech is basically Moshe Dayan. He was actually at Kibbutz Be'eri, I think, one of the kibbutzim that was attacked horrifically on October 7th. I think lost about a quarter of his population. He attended the funeral of a young lieutenant who had been killed by several people out of Gaza. And his words, I can't remember his direct words, but he basically says something to the effect of, we're never going to be able to be there at all times when an Arab attacks a Jewish person or when a terrorist attacks a Jewish person. We can't stop or predict every single attack, but we can demand a high price for our blood. And that has been the Israeli ethos of, you know what, you want to come in and you want to blow yourself up and shoot up buses full of civilians. You do it 100 times. We stop you 99 times. On the 100th time, you will eventually get through. But we will make sure that for every single Jewish person that you kill, we're going to kill 10 of you. And Gaza after October 7th is very much the effect of that. This is several generations of that mentality that brought us to this point where, we're in Gaza now, and we're, as you said, just throwing ammunition at targets that we think may or may not be Hamas, or that we think are Hamas, but they may or may not be, hoping that some kind of solution eventually presents itself. Because if history's taught us anything, it's that this kind of deterrence, quote unquote, is not effective. It's been the Israeli ethos for the past, since the state's been a state, and even going back further than that. If you want to really take it back to like the Abi Nusra riots back in the 1920s, up until today, it's almost 100 years of attacks, reprisals, attacks, reprisals, attacks, reprisals. And yeah, I think at this point we are just kind of winging it. I think for us, it's there because there is no endgame, because there is this belief, at least on the Israeli side and on both sides, I would say, that neither side is interested in a political solution besides the maximalist solution. That the only thing you can do is to just keep killing each other and hope that some kind of solution eventually presents itself.
And, when I listen to what you're describing, and, you're referring to classic examples from Israel in the 50s with that classic speech of Moshe Dayan saying that things like this are just going to repeat themselves over and over and over again. And to a certain extent, there is a certain degree of realism in the Israeli approach that I think I can appreciate. I can appreciate the sense of, this is never gonna get any better.
I want to add something onto that too, because it reminded me one of the things Moshe Dayan says in that speech as well. He even says, I don't blame the Arabs for doing what they're doing, because if I were on their side, if I were born Palestinian, I would be doing the exact same thing. He saw himself in a lot of these terrorists, and he completely understood what they were doing, and he completely understood that if it were him, he wouldn't do it. So why would he wouldn't stop? So why would he ever expect the Palestinians to stop?
And there's something to that that's very realistic and very, it takes the grand cold nature of strategy and boils it down to a real fight between peoples. And I think that Moshe Dayan and that classic speech that really does resonate till today in a lot of Israel's modern problems really captured that very well and very much reflected the unscripted warfare that we've been seeing Israel engaging in now for many years. Because from the Israeli perspective, the best that we could achieve is I almost call it strategic catharsis. Yeah, it's like this idea of, our strategy is just to get out that feeling of you hit us, we're going to hit you back, exact a price for Jewish blood, and wait for the next round. But, all of what we're talking about now really does bring me back to, our own experiences in the Army. But I have to say that both especially in reserve duty, but not just in reserve duty, I also saw this during my regular service, I think that the one thing that really does tie the Army together as like a common trait that I've seen pretty much throughout every unit that I've encountered is this cultural notion of almost like something of a people's militia trying to wear the cap of a professional army. And it just doesn't always work. I don't know if you felt that same way, but there are times where I see Israel, for better or for worse, making decisions at the tactical military level that are almost reminiscent of how a militia would approach certain problems from an organizational cultural perspective, and less so how I would expect an army to plan and execute on strategy from the battalion level and up.
Can you expand on that a little bit, like what a militia strategy would look like versus a conventional, like professional army?
Yeah, like, for example, the way that a traditional unit is supposed to operate when they get a task. Yeah, they get the overarching goal of the unit that's above them, like a brigade gets from its division, a battalion gets from its brigade. They get that overarching goal that is set from them from the one level above them. They have their certain theater of operation. It could be a part of Gaza, it could be a part of Lebanon, wherever it might be. And it's the responsibility of that unit to think, okay, I have tanks, I have infantry, I have combat engineering, I have combat intelligence, whatever it might be.
How do I use all this to accomplish the task that was given to me?
To accomplish the goal. Or, better put, and this is not just a military thing, this is, it's the same idea even in the corporate world. How do I connect between my goal and my tasks? Or in other words, what is my strategy? Yeah, like that's basically the question that I would expect a professional army to answer. Now, there is a certain degree of, Moshe Dayan-styled unscripted realism that I think does play out at least in my own experience, and a lot of the things that I've seen, where I don't always see this clear, concrete plan to, okay, this is how we're going to achieve the goal of destroying a battalion of Hamas in a given area, if that's the goal that we got. What I see is a lot of improvisation. I see the Israeli army kind of just going into an area and thinking, okay, we got this goal of destroying Hamas operatives in this area. Why don't we, set out a patrol here, a patrol there, strike here, strike there. Tomorrow we'll coordinate some sort of joint action with another unit and go into this other part of our area of responsibility. But I don't really see this clear understanding of, this is our end game, this is our goal, these are the tasks that I need to carry out to achieve that goal. Let's connect between the two of them. And I think that there's also a positive side to this, which we could also get into, but I think if we're going to, let's start out first with the negative side. I think that Israel very much pays the price for this perennial unscripted warfare. Mm. We just don't have any way of getting out of this. We're kind of just stuck in the Moshe Dayan paradox of, they hit us, we hit them back. What is our long-term solution here?
I think we know what the long-term solution is, and I think the government has made it very clear. Bibi himself has said, we're aligning with the Trump plan, which is that the Gazans will relocate. The Trump plan suggested maybe temporary, maybe not. My guess would be the Israelis prefer them, maybe not. And already you're seeing reports in, I just read in Haaretz, whatever, if you're right-wing, then just cover your ears. But Haaretz made a report that Palestinians are getting text messages on their phone encouraging them to make an appointment to emigrate. And it's clear that there's lots of rumors. You told me as well, there's a rumor flying around that tens of thousands of Gazans have already left. There have been some publicized news reports of Gazans leaving, and I think the solution is, we're just going to make life as miserable for you as possible until you leave or you die. But
that's I don't necessarily think you're wrong, but that's like the grand political level, yeah. Which I don't even know how much of that
it's a strategy. It's a strategy to win the war. If you're saying that, at the end of the day, I think Israelis believe Hamas when Hamas tells them everyone here is Hamas. The only way to beat us is to kill every single person in Gaza. I think Israelis believe that when they hear it, and I think for them the solution is very simple, which is, okay, if you're all Hamas and we've declared war on Hamas, then we have to get rid of you. And the modern political climate doesn't allow us to go all Julius Caesar on the Gauls, but what we can do is try and at least give you the option, like you're making the decision to leave, and we'll, continue to say, and I'm sure, simple, just like what happened in the West Bank, which is, with Oslo, where we will be the stewards of this land until an agreeable Palestinian government is put into place, and then we will return the land to you, and you'll have your own Palestinian state. And I'm sure that in 10 years, and 20 years, and 50 years out, Israel will just say, oh, well, there's no one for us to negotiate with in order to give them back Gaza, so I guess we'll have to build another settlement in the meantime. That seems to be kind of the direction that the Israelis are headed. And, it doesn't... On the one hand, look, I don't want to turn this into the, self-flagellation of hating myself for being Israeli. I've done enough of that this past 18 months. And B, I see why Israelis would think that way, because, when you hear Palestinians chant from the river to the sea, Israelis take that literally, and they say, okay, so basically you're giving me only two options here, which is to succumb to you and to lose and to be victims of a second genocide in less than 100 years, or to do what I have to do in order to maintain my state, in order to maintain my home and my family and my community, and I will do whatever it takes in order to maintain those things, just like anyone listening to this podcast would likely do the exact same thing.
Yeah, and again, I don't necessarily disagree with you and your analysis of the situation, but I think even in the way you describe it, you also kind of reveal that there is a certain degree to which we're not achieving the long-term goal here. Yeah, because that is, I think, is what separates a bunch of tactics lumped together and a strategy. I think a strategy is, let's look at the goal, the task to achieve that goal, and connect them. The goal has been set up since the beginning of the war, which is to dismantle Hamas in the Gaza Strip, both militarily and politically, and return all the hostages. If that's the goal, then the actions that Israel is currently taking, applying military pressure, maybe allowing some degree of voluntary emigration from Gaza, these things may weaken Hamas, or it may increase pressure to return the hostages. It may be the case. But, when we're talking about the timeframes that you're mentioning, and I think you're right, I think your analysis of the situation is correct. Yeah, we'll just keep this going, and then 10 years will go by, 20 years will go by, and talk to me then. I don't view that as a strategy. I view that as I'm too indecisive to make a clear decision about what my vision is for Gaza. But I know that if I do a bunch of different things to tactically improve my situation, I'll be a little bit happier 10 years from now than I will be now.
I just think that Israel just can't say out loud. It just politically, it can't allow itself to say out loud what its actual strategy is, which is to remove all the Gazans from Gaza and to annex that land essentially into Israel. It de facto annexed in the same way it's de facto many parts of the West Bank. I think that is very much a strategy, and it is, from just a realpolitik perspective, it's a rational strategy. It's not necessarily one that I would agree with or that I would do if I were emperor of Israel. But the government has made it very clear that, one, they side with the Trump plan of removing the Gazans out of Gaza, and Smollett said it himself. The hostages are not the most important objective in this war. He said that a couple nights ago. He has made it very clear what the government's position is. They are not interested in getting the hostages back if it means they can just get all the Gazans out of Gaza. That is a strategy. Again, from a purely rational machine mind, it's a strategy. I think from a human and a spiritual level, it is a horrendous stain on Jewish history. But hey, that's a separate conversation.
So I want to take this conversation down a bit of a different path, but related to our overall theme of the unscripted army, the unscripted warfare that Israel is fighting in the Gaza Strip. And one would arguably say since the time of Moshe Dayan and even before, as you connected yourself. I look, for example, at the recent incident that happened where a tracker was killed in the Israeli perimeter, meaning an IDF soldier was killed in the buffer zone that Israel is ruling right now, separating the Israeli border communities along the Gaza Strip from the Gaza population. This happened a few days ago. And his death was truly tragic. It happened in kind of a series of events where at first a bunch of terrorists, at least from what we see in open sources, came out of a tunnel shaft, shot an RPG, or at least one RPG, at a jeep that was holding within it combat soldiers that were moving from one part of the border to another area in the buffer zone. Afterwards, the brigade commander of that area came to see what was happening in the specific in his area of responsibility, and a terrorist set off a roadside bomb that then killed the tracker who came to the scene. Now, this whole event that happened, you and I also spoke about this before we started recording. Hamas released a recording or a video recording of this event, and you can just see, just from the recording, if it is true, just how arguably undisciplined, unscripted the IDF truly is. I mean,
it's not that it's unscripted. Look, at the end of the day, I think we can both relate to the IDF soldiers who are. To be clear, if you haven't seen the video, it's an unarmored jeep following a white pickup truck with a massive Israeli flag. Think your most redneck Texan and the American flags they love to drive out the back of their Chevrolets. It looked like that.
Yeah.
It was a massive Israeli flag and an unarmored army jeep following it. Beautiful target for a well-placed ambush, which Hamas had. Which, the vehicle, I believe several soldiers, mostly female soldiers, were horribly wounded. When the battalion commander arrived to the scene, roadside bomb, killed a tracker. The question that obviously Michael and I had when watching the video was, how is an unarmored jeep moving through this area? Well, the area was not, by the IDF standard at least, considered a live combat zone. It was actually considered to be very safe. And my guess would be that these people on the patrol there had done this drive probably 100 times already. And there's no reason from their perspective to have an armored vehicle which could be having more use somewhere else in that particular zone. And they paid the price for it. I think that it's easy to get complacent in war, which for people who haven't been to war might sound shocking, but it's very easy to get lazy. It's very easy to get complacent. It's very easy to just succumb to your own exhaustion and fatigue and to just kind of nod off a little bit when you're supposed to be guarding your position. It's very easy to do all these things. They're not rare at all. And it's not shocking that some soldiers went in and were not protecting themselves effectively after having done probably this patrol 100 times and tragically suffered the consequence by what is admittedly a well-placed ambush.
I could agree with you 50%. I think part of it truly is understandable and I think a natural part of operating in the same area for so long. You get to a certain comfort zone in your area of responsibility, and you think that in my same buffer zone that I've been operating in now for months, there hasn't been an incident, which means that there probably won't be an incident going forward. You accept this fallacy to kind of feed into itself, and you allow these incidents to happen. I do think, though, that, and again, I'm kind of just guessing here, I don't really know how other armies operate, but if one would compare the Israeli army here to the American army, not saying the Americans are necessarily the most disciplined, there have been many recorded examples of a lack of discipline in the American army as well, but I would be very hard-pressed to see a situation of this level where you see America conquering a certain region, saying, yeah, let's just take pickup trucks and drive from place to place within this area that the military is currently governing.
Well, dude, have you ever seen
have
you ever seen the HBO show Generation Kill?
I have not seen Generation Kill.
First of all, you absolutely should. It's a fantastic show. It came out in, I think, 06, 07. So just really, a few years after the Iraq War started. And it was based on the real-life events of a Rolling Stones reporter who went in with a platoon of Marine First Recon guys, more elite reconnaissance Marines. They were very much the tip of the spear for their, I think, entire division. So he was in the front vehicle the whole time. And he writes about just what a mess it was. I mean, here you have, these guys are reconnaissance guys, right? They're meant to go, off-road, around enemy lines, observing. That's their job. Meanwhile, these guys were leading, they were leading tanks into seizing airfields kind of situation. Like things that these guys should not have been doing. All in light-skinned Humvees, some of them with no roofs even. Guys who should not be doing this job at all. And a lot of the show is them complaining, how is this fallen to us? So, look, it absolutely exists in the American Army. There's no doubt that, again, it does come down to, I think, sure, we can talk about IDF discipline, and I'm happy to talk about that too. But, and I know when you and I first saw the video, we almost were furious at the soldiers because it's satisfying to blame the soldiers and to say, these guys were undisciplined, they got lazy, they got complacent. It actually reminds me of when I first went into Gaza, and one of the first casualties we took was an officer in Nahal who was with us at the time. And the higher echelon tried to tell us that, well, this guy didn't have his vest on. He didn't have his vest on with his ceramic plate covering, and he took a bullet, and if only he had his vest on, he'd still be with us. And his soldiers were so furious, they went around telling everybody that that was a dirty lie, that this guy had his vest on, that he did everything he was supposed to. And what happened was just a Hamas guy popped up, saw his exposed side, and shot it, and got a hit, and he died. And it had nothing to do with discipline. It had nothing to do with it. The guy just got the drop on him, and that's all it takes. And I think in this instance is that I don't think it's reasonable to expect that every patrol is going to happen in an armored vehicle or in a tank, because there just aren't enough armored vehicles and tanks. And if the IDF's intelligence division, and this is not a dig at you, if the IDF's intelligence division says, hey, the Hamas guys are here in Khan Yunis, then why would you need that in a buffer zone? You would want that on the front lines where it should be. The buffer zone can be managed by foot patrols or by, lightly armored jeeps. And Hamas, these guys are smart. They're not stupid, as much as we want to underestimate them. They're going to go look for soft targets. That's what insurgent armies do. They look for soft targets. And when they see an unarmored vehicle moving around doing the same patrol day after day after day, it is just a juicy and tempting target. And for Hamas to do that in an area that the IDF deems quote-unquote safe, it's just another spit in the eye of the IDF to say, hey, you guys, nothing you say is believable, and you guys are completely inefficient and ineffective, and we just proved it because we ambushed you in your quote-unquote safe zone, and we humiliated you yet again on the world stage.
So I can appreciate what you're saying, and the way I interpret what you're saying is you really break it down into three components. You say, yeah, Michael, I hear you, but let's be realistic. This is how situations ultimately play out in practice, and I can't give everyone an armored vehicle. Second, you say that Israel is not alone in this, that the American army also has had instances like this, as you mentioned in the Generation Kill example. And in the third thing that you mentioned, you say that basically, maybe this is just the, how fair is it to ultimately blame the soldiers for this, right? Because you bring up the example of the guy you knew from Nahal that was killed in that specific instance, and that seemed to be unfair to a certain degree. I do want...
Can I just add one thing about the Nahal officer? The reason that command did that, why they told us that, was because they wanted us to make sure that we were keeping our vests on. That was their thought process. Their thought process was, if we just tell them it's going to happen, then they're going to feel like they have control over whether they live or die. Which is why I think it's so tempting for us, especially for us as soldiers, to blame other soldiers when they die. Like, oh, they were doing something wrong, and if only they'd stuck to protocol or stuck to their training, they'd still be alive. When the truth is that sometimes you just, you have someone who's either just a little bit better than you, or you're just playing in their playground, and they know it better than you do, and they're able to do things like flank you and ambush you and do things that you didn't expect them to do.
I hear what you're saying, but if I slippery slope your idea to the extreme, then I can say, okay, then why even use armored vehicles to go in and out of Gaza? I may as well use other vehicles to go in and out, especially if I have a lack of resources. Why even do this? Why I could take this idea of almost complacency to a certain degree, and I can play it out to the level of not having any discipline in the army at all. So I hear you, and we have to be fair, and we can't overjudge, and we have to be aware of our own desire and instinct to place the blame on those who suffered in the incident as a way for us to kind of feel better about ourselves. I hear you, but we just have to be careful not to take that idea too extreme, because the slippery slope of that.
I do want to add that we did go in and out of Gaza. We did go in and out of Gaza in roofless Humvees.
Yeah. But I'm not even talking about the roofless Humvee. Yeah, like even in that instance, like the whole like Hummers going out of Gaza or Humvees going out of Gaza,
we walked.
But by the way, walking is probably like
sometimes in pairs though, not as a platoon, but sometimes in pairs.
But in certain circumstances, might have actually been your safer bet. Yeah, depending on the specific area
if you were walking and you face an ambush like the one we saw in the video, you'd be in very much trouble.
Again, it depends on what you're facing and what you're going up against. But looking at these specific instances, what I'm asking myself here is: are we just being complacent? Are we just saying these taglines to ourselves to just kind of like, just like you said with the Nahal example, that we kind of just like cling on to these specific explanations of, the soldier did something that he shouldn't have done, and, therefore we feel better about ourselves that it's not going to happen to us. Wait, one sec. Are we just doing that because we want to, be complacent and kind of come up with explanations for things that, maybe the explanation is actually that we did fuck up and we actually did do something that we're not supposed to do. The example
Does that
you gave.
apply in the situation?
But, if you look at, for example, the Generation Kill, instance that you discussed where, other armies are also carrying out this sort of behavior. Yeah, I'm sure. It's like if I ask the question, do murders take place in areas outside of my city? Yeah, murders happen everywhere. Murders happen in Norway. You have a chance of dying by murder.
Bring you back.
In Norway.
I don't understand. Does what you're saying, does wanting to accept complacency, does that apply in this situation? Were these soldiers being complacent, or was it a logistics issue?
So again, what I'm saying to you is that in this specific example that you gave of Generation Kill, I think that the real question is not whether or not we can identify other instances of soldier complacency or commander complacency or whoever is responsible complacency in other armies to basically say that, okay, we're not alone in this. I think the question is whether or not these events happen to the same degree of frequency. And again, I don't have any statistical evidence to back this up, but anecdotally, I would be very surprised if the degree of unscripted warfare that we see in the Gaza Strip plays itself out to the same degree as in professional armies like the U.S. Army. Not to say it doesn't happen, but I would be hard-pressed to find the same frequency of examples in both armies. So that's in terms of one. Two, in terms of what you were describing regarding, being too quick to blame, I agree with you. We shouldn't be too quick to blame, and I'm not at all blaming these soldiers in this specific incident for what happened. I do blame their commanders. I do put the blame on those who made the decision to send 3 vehicles into Gaza. Some were more well-armored than others, at least from what we see in this video. Not all of them were armored to the same degree. But yeah, I think that this is just, a certain degree of tying it back to what you were saying earlier. Moshe Dayan complacency of, inevitably, they're going to come out of an ambush one day, they're going to shoot at us, they're going to kill us, and the best we can do is just to put a high price for our blood.
First of all, I think we need some degree of humility here. Like, we don't know all the factors into play as to why these guys were going in a white pickup truck with a massive Israeli flag sticking out the back, which I would love to hear an explanation for that. That part I really can't imagine one. But for the unarmored military jeep, I'm sure there is an explanation of why they were going in that. And my guess is it probably just had to do with logistics, because there's only so many armored vehicles in the IDF. Many of them are in Syria, many of them are in the West Bank, many of them are on the border of Lebanon, and the fact that you can do patrols along the buffer zone in Gaza in just armored vehicles, I just think is unrealistic. That's number one. Number two, I wouldn't tie this into Moshe Dayan. I don't think Moshe Dayan certainly was not advocating complacency by any measure. He was advocating vigilance. He was advocating personal responsibility to some extent, basically saying like, hey, the IDF's not going to be here for you all the time, so you got to take care of yourself because, we're only so many people. And especially if you take it in the context of 1956, this was not a built-out army at all. It was still very much like a revolutionary army in a lot of ways. So the point he was just trying to make was there's nothing we can do to stop these attacks. We just this is just a part of our daily life, and we need to, you as the individual have to be prepared for this, and we as the army will do what we can to make sure that anyone who's even thinking of doing something like this is also going to have in the back of their minds that they're going to lose dozens of neighbors and friends and potentially family members as well, if not their own life, in the process. And that hopefully that will deter at least a few people and we'll be able to save a few lives.
But again, I hear what you're saying, but the question is, I think Moshe Dayan also made a comment like this, the proof is in the pudding. Yeah, that was one of his, common lines that he would always like to refer to. The proof is in the pudding. Did this work in the end result or did it not work? And in the end result, the price for Jewish blood did not seem to be sufficiently expensive to change anything on the ground for the past 80-somewhat years, 60-somewhat years since that comment was made, or 70 years since that comment was made. And,
And to me, yeah, sure, Moshe Dayan was advocating for vigilance. He was wanting us to actively fight and defend ourselves and to put a price tag for our blood. But I think that there's a certain degree of implicit complacency that comes with that, where we allow ourselves to very quickly say, yeah, these things will always happen. They'll always come at us and they'll always try to kill us. Yeah, like, I don't have room in this, specific convoy of trucks that I want to send into Gaza, so we're just going to send in, a white vehicle that's completely unarmored with an Israeli flag on it. Yeah, like, we'll hope for the best. Now, I do think that we have to judge these situations by the end result. The end result of this incident on the border were multiple soldiers getting seriously wounded and one soldier getting killed. That's the end result. You see that end result, you see this video coming out from Hamas. We don't know how verified this video is, but if this video is true, with the end result that we know as a fact on the ground that happened, one does ask the question of, are we kind of just feeding into this endless Moshe Dayan loop of unscripted warfare that allows us to just keep taking this going forward with total complacency, fighting against our Palestinian neighbors with no clear end in sight?
Well, I totally agree with you, actually. I look, revisionist Zionism very much fell into the ideology that, look, through military might, we can force the Arabs into a peace. That they will never of their own free will agree to a peace agreement with Israel, but through enough military pressure, we can force them to accept our existence here and to sit down at the table with us and to make a state with us. That was Jabotinsky's vision. That's the same ideology that gave birth to the Likud, and that's very much the ideology, at least in theory, that Bibi Netanyahu went into. I think if we want to do, as Darren said, the proofs in the pudding situation, then yeah, the idea that we're going to just keep doing reprisal attacks and that will somehow bring about a result or a peaceful result to this is just wrong. I think it's wrong from a historical perspective and a psychological perspective as well. This idea of complacency is, I think I think the complacency just kind of came with this feeling of strength, like this feeling of, we'll always be able to get at them, we'll always be able to take them out, so we really don't have to worry so much. And at the end of the day, we were also just outplayed. Like that's also a separate issue as well. I don't think that had much to do with complacency so much as just the fact that we were outplayed by an evil genius named Yahya Sinwar. But
you're referring to October 7th.
Yes, we were just completely outplayed in that situation. But in terms of just kind of like just going back to this particular situation on the border, I don't know. I have trouble believing it was complacency. I think that we are in the situation we're in today because Israelis very much fell into this cynicism. At the end of the day, Israelis love to point to all the peace agreements that didn't pass and say, look, this is proof, that we just couldn't make peace with these guys. Gosh darn it, if only they were a little bit more flexible, this would have happened. Or if only they weren't trying to kill us, like this would have happened. And my response to that is always like, you know what? You try, and you try again. Because the alternative is exactly where we're at right now, which is, look, the Gaza war as it stands today, I disagree with the label of genocide. I don't think it's a genocide, but if the grand strategy is true, if ethnic displacement or death is, which seems to be the direction that things are going, is true, my guy, that's a genocide. There's no other way around that. That is strict legal definition genocide. And look, when you're fighting an existential war, or when you believe you're fighting an existential war, that really is your only option. I have a personal theory, and I call it the predator-prey distinction. And I believe, I don't know if I told you this even privately, but this is something that I think is one of the biggest motivating factors in the human psyche. If this is, as far as I know, I came up with this, so copyright right now.
Copyright's on
right now. Look, looking back into history, right? Homo sapiens have been around for about 150,000 years. Prior to that, human beings have been around for about 2 million years. And for most of that 2 million year history, we were prey. We were weak, vulnerable, slow, poor night vision, poor hearing, poor sense of smell, prey. We were perfect for Paleolithic era large mammals, like saber-toothed tigers, for instance, who could easily outrun us, pick us off, or pick off our children in a much more easily, and have a nice, delicious, tasty meal. At some point, human beings learned how to fight back, likely by grouping together, by going into caves and having a narrow entrance, which they could kind of defend. And then by at some point in history, somebody went on the attack. Somebody started hunting. And if you look at today, like what happened recently in Hadera, someone was eaten by a shark. Typically, when something like this happens, when a person is eaten by an animal, and if it's by a shark or by like a tiger in India or by a mountain lion in California, governments will spend millions of dollars and use vast amounts of resources, public resources, to hunt down and kill every animal of that species and cut its belly open to see if there's human remains inside. And they won't stop until they find that human remain inside. And you know what the thing is it's actually very effective at keeping animals away. When you do that, animals will recognize because they're just pure rationality. They will move away at least for a generation or two. They'll come back eventually once the third or fourth generation starts. They don't have a parent to keep them away from that area. They'll come back, but for at least a couple animal generations, they will stay away from that area. They will not seek revenge. They just want to live and eat. And if the prey is too deadly, they'll remove themselves from the situation. This, I think, has been something that we've been evolved to think and believe, and it's been an act that we then carry out on each other. Because we don't want to be prey. We want to be the predators. But the problem is that when a human being attacks you and you carry out that kind of predator-prey justice on them, well, you've activated that predator-prey mindset in them as well. And now they're going to do the same thing to you. And eventually, at some point, you get to a situation where we have to just kill every single one of them. Because it doesn't seem to matter how many times we fight them, they always fight back. So our only option here is to just wipe them out. Or, in other cases, to just completely conquer, humiliate, whatever the situation might be. And that's the situation we are right now. Is that, Hamas, the Palestinians, their culture has been shaped by us. They know that if they carry out an attack, they're likely going to die. And a lot of people are going to die. And that sort of nihilistic acceptance of death is very much a part of their culture. It's very much in the way that they speak. Where you have the Palestinian leaders saying, yeah, we know we have to sacrifice. We know that a lot of Palestinian women and children are going to die as a result of October 7th. And we're okay with that. That's been our cost ever since Jews started immigrating en masse to this land. That's been the price that our people have paid. And we're willing to pay that price if it means that we can finally have a state of our own and live in security and safety. Because there's no other way to do it. That's the way the Israelis play ball. Fine, that's how you guys want to play. That's how we'll play. That's been the Palestinian mentality as well. And so this predator-prey distinction in my mind is so powerful that in many ways it can actually overwhelm the instinct to live. And that many people would rather go... Look at the metaphors we use when we talk about fighting. Going down, you fought like a lion, you fought like a wolf, you fought like a tiger, The idea that you're going to be a predator animal. Because the human being is no longer the prey. We're now the predator animal. We want to remind ourselves and show ourselves that we are that predator animal, that we are that apex predator. And I think that driving force, that driving mentality, has very much brought us in the situation that we are today.
Yeah.
Where... And you know what? I'm furious at all the pro-Palestinian protesters and advocates who say, Israel's a colonial state, Israel doesn't deserve to exist, Israel should leave. And I'm like, are you stupid? You're just playing into the Israeli right. How can I, as more of a moderate, go to my Israeli neighbor and tell him, look, what if we just try again? What if we just go back to the table for old time's sake? He's going to say, forget October 7th and all of that. He's like, look at what they're saying. They're saying we don't deserve to exist. The world is saying we don't deserve to exist. So we go to the table, their demands are going to be, get out. How can I possibly acquiesce? How can I possibly even entertain that as a possibility? No, our only solution is to fight. Yeah. And yeah, you might call it winging it, and in some ways it very much is, because any other peaceful solution, at least from the Israeli perspective, and the Palestinian perspective, I would say, has been completely thrown out the window. So at this point, the problem is too is that Israel's been a little bit rewarded for winging it. We winged it for the first year and a half, and then Trump came into office and said, let's get them all out of Gaza. And Israel said, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And you know what? Maybe when you look at how it fared for the Palestinians, maybe winging it is not all that bad of an idea. If you look at, for example, everything you just described about the nihilistic approach of much of the Palestinian population, Palestinian political culture, I actually think that the Palestinians and Yahya Sinwar, before he was assassinated at the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, I think that the Palestinians actually had a much more cohesive strategy going into October 7th and afterwards than the Israelis did. Sinwar very much had an end goal in mind, where he wanted, as the Iranians have often discussed, the ring of fire to ignite itself around the state of Israel, from Lebanon to Syria to Jordan and even to Egypt and elsewhere, and of course into the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and carry out a series of events that will ultimately lead to Israel's destruction. He had a strategy, but his only problem was that the strategy backfired, and much of the region is currently in upheaval against that very same ring of fire that he wanted to ignite against the state of Israel. So what one does ask the question, of everything that we've said thus far, kind of somewhat criticizing the Israeli approach as being just this haphazard mishmash of a bunch of tactics improvised in this unscripted way throughout the course of the war. Maybe this was the best decision that we could have made when you compare it to the Palestinians.
See, I actually think that this guy is outplaying us from the grave. His goal, as has been the Palestinian goal for a long time, is to decouple the U.S.-Israel relationship and to leave Israel isolated. Because that is a vulnerable Israel. Israel with the U.S. backing is a dangerous animal. But an isolated and alone Israel is something that the region can handle. By that I mean, of course, the Muslim Middle East can take on an Israel that doesn't have the U.S. backing and possibly win. Again, you add in the atomic factor, the fact that Israel has nuclear bombs, and that I'm sure if Israel were about to be overrun, it would launch nuclear bombs in every direction and just say, all right, the world's not going to exist without Israel, so deal with that. But I think that is very much Sinwar's goal. Is he's playing the long game, and you know what? There's a concept in chess. It's like Zhejuan. It's something Chinese. I can't remember what it's called, but it sounds delicious. I'm just kidding. But basically, what it is that you want to put your opponent in the position where every move they make just makes their situation worse. Because there's no pass in chess, right? It can't be your turn in chess. You just go pass. You have to make a move. And you want them in a position where every move they make just makes their situation a little bit worse. I think it's exactly what's going on now. That every move that Israel could possibly make as a result of October 7th would just put us in a worse position.
It's almost like a passive salami slicing. It's like, passively being in a situation where you're slowly being cut down bit by bit into nothingness.
I think the Zhejuan thing just got us both hungry. Now we're doing food metaphors.
Yeah, well, if we're already talking food, looking at the time.
You want to end it right here at that completely horrible note?
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna. Should we end it here? Is there anything else that we wanna add on this topic?
I've missed our podcast. Like I can go for several hours.
But
we can do a part 2 in the much near future if we want.
We'll have to part 2 this then.
All right, part 2 it is. All right, guys. Thank you if you made it through. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to getting back to our more regular schedule very soon.
Take care, everyone.